Dobar dan. Moje ime je Ana Marjanović Šejn i ja sam independent scholar, što bi se reklo, to jest nezavisni, ne umetnik, but istraživač u Sjedinjenim Američkim Državama, poreklom iz Beograda i sa saradnjom sa mnogim mojim kolegama u Beogradu i širom zemlje. Hvala vam veoma što ste me pozvali na ovaj vaš skup i jedva čekam da se možda vidimo preko Zooma u junu. Ja sam vam poslala jedan snimak, šaljem vam u stvari jedan snimak mog plenarnog izlaganja, moje prezentacije i šaljem vam takođe samu prezentaciju. Ja ću ovaj snimak sada koji pravim editovati i uključit ću ga kao početak moje prezentacije. Dakle, hvala vam na pozivu i uživajte u prezentaciji, iako će biti na engleskom jeziku. Pošto sam tako zamoljena od strane organizatora, a i meni je na neki način posle ovoliko godina rada i razvoja sopstvenog pogleda na svet i sopstvene nauke o značenju, o dijalogu, o jeziku, o umetnosti, o kreativnosti na engleskom. Meni je sada postalo i lakše na neki način da govorim na engleskom. Mada naravno svi rođeni Amerikanci ili Englezi odmah prepoznaju da nisam maternji govornik tog jezika, jer i dalje imam naš akcent. No sve u svemu to nije loše. Dakle, počinjemo.
Prezentacija se zove Opportunities and Challenges for a Dialogic Approach to Art Education in the Conventional Schools. Why is art important in education? Elliot Eisner, a famous American visionary in art education, created about 10 points of importance of art in education, based on humanistic and progressive values of education. These 10 points could be summarized as 4 main purposes of art education. Let me talk about that. So this was from a book, The Arts and the Creation of Mind, in chapter 4. So the first purpose of art education is because art can help a student make good judgments rather than learning correct answers. In other words, very simply said, art legitimizes expressing your own opinions and making judgments about about things in the world, like is something good, bad, do you like it, not like it, and why, simply said. Second purpose of art education is because the arts can help a student appreciate that there are many ways to see and interpret the world, and that these perspectives can change depending on the concrete, unique events, people, opportunities, and cultures. Third purpose is that the arts promote multiple modes of cognition and communication besides language, giving richness to one's experiences of life and ways to reflect about them, express them, and share them with others. All senses are involved, and more than just senses. And fourth, the arts create new ways of experiencing the world that extend and refine the range of human emotions and perspectives on life. Arts creates a new world that does not exist in everyday natural life of living beings. So this is Eisner's point of view, and we will see later throughout my presentation and at the very end, what do we like or not like about his purposes. That means we will make good judgments together, and whether these support or not support a dialogic point of view. Let me also tell you something that I think. The place that art education occupies in the school curriculum and instruction is a result of what the educators, the policymakers, and the teachers believe about what is important in experiencing, understanding, and relating to the self, the other, and the world, the value of humanizing life itself. This is a drawing of a little child. Most of the drawings that you will see in this presentation are from a book by Rhoda Kellogg, Analyzing Children's Art from 1969. So that plays how the educators see what is important about art, sends the ultimate message that will be conveyed to the students about how to relate to themselves, to others, and to the world, because art is what creates our outer and inner being, where we become really human. My own pre-service teachers, my own students that I have taught for years, especially one generation, came up with diverse approaches to the purposes of teaching art. So here are like 4 categories or approaches, like why would they teach art as teachers, especially elementary teachers from the grades 1 to 4. So some of them were putting a highlight or an accent on an instrumental approach, that art is good to teach because it serves other academic disciplines like, for instance, math, geometry, natural and social sciences, literature, history, and even some areas of art itself, that it's good to teach it because the students will get fine motor coordination or good expression of in language and so on. But the art in itself is used as an instrument to serve something else outside of it. One other completely opposite approach of my students was an essentialist approach, like art for art's sake. Art is valuable in itself, so it is intrinsically creative and meaningful practice of human imagination and creativity, and also relating to each other, and so it should be taught just for its own value. There was another approach, which I called, or we all called together, a therapeutic approach. Art is used for regenerating students' psyche and giving them new energy for the grueling academic work in school. School's work is very hard, very often boring, people get drained, and when you have a period in which you can make art, this regenerates you. And finally, there was an approach that some of them highlighted. Art is good for building social skills and community building, to create harmony, solidarity, tolerance of others, and cultivate good values and social justice. I also want to say that these were not exclusive. People can have all of them together and agree with them, or put more into one or the other. So let's see what is dialogic pedagogy and what is its significance, and why am I now going to introduce the whole dialogic pedagogy. My friend and colleague, Eugene Matusov, an American scholar of dialogic pedagogy, claims the following, and I really agree with that. Education is rooted in meaning-making. There is no good education without meaning-making or without any meaning-making. And meaning is inherently dialogic. Meaning is something that happens between people and among people. Even if you think that you are alone, then the meaning is between you and you in some ways, or with you in the past and you in the future. It's always inherently dialogic, and we will see why. So it's not that pedagogy should be dialogic. He says, I rather argue that it is always dialogic. The question is only what kind of a dialogue and what kind of meanings are possible to derive from that kind of dialogue in education. So this is true whether the participants in education or outside observers of education realize it or not, and even when the participants are resistant to dialogue itself. Like if you have education based on lectures or just strict instruction, it still is a kind of dialogue, but maybe very distorted dialogue in which people are not having equal rights. And this is very important for a genuine dialogue. The dialogic meaning making that's really genuine and good for everyone, according to Mikhail Bakhtin, who was a philosopher of dialogism, means that dialogue takes place among a plurality of consciousnesses with equal rights and each with its own world, who combine but are not merged in a unity of an event. In other words, people have to be what we say in our language, ravnopravni u dijalogu. Njihovo mišljenje mora biti ravnopravno drugim mišljenjima i uvaženo. So meaning making happens in dialogue when people or learners can test their ideas, opinions, values, and desires against other people's ideas, opinions, values, and desires in real time, and sometimes just through reading books or thinking. So these tested ideas, opinions, values, and desires can be expressed in different ways and through many modalities, of course, linguistic, visual, musical, tactile, dance, rhythm, taste, and everything. Therefore, all the arts are really that are based on meaning making that is in some way dialogic. I now want to present two different approaches to creativity. A conventional approach to creativity is, from my point of view, monologic, authoritative, objectivist, and positivist. What does that mean? So creativity is seen as existing in itself independently from the understanding, evaluation, and dialogic positions of people who participate in this creative process and those who study them. Creativity is seen as a particular human ability, like, for instance, divergent thinking. Somebody is creative, has an ability to be creative, and somebody is not. Creativity is seen as a personality trait that can be developed or present in some individuals or not. Creativity is seen as quality of human experience, like a particular psychological state. If you know about very famous American theoretician of Hungarian origin, Csikszentmihalyi, he talked about being in a creative flow, getting into that state of mind. So the goal of conventional approach to creativity is to find the universal and the final truth about what this phenomenon, creativity, is in itself. In contrast, a dialogic approach to authorial approach to creativity sees creativity as what it means to the participants in a meaningful social practices. Therefore, not as something universal given from above or something essentialist that exists, but how it's perceived and understood among people who are at any given moment in some way in relationship with each other. So creativity is seen in the context of the relationships among the participants in dialogue. For dialogically testing participants' ideas, positions, and desires in light of personal, social, and cultural values, in terms of transcendence and transformation of the relationships in the meaning-making process. Creativity is one of the central qualities of learning and teaching in the authorial approach to education that actively recognizes values and actively promotes the authorial nature of teaching and learning, where each student can be an author of their own teaching, learning. So the authorial nature of a human activity reveals itself in the recognition of personal, unique contribution and responsibility, reflecting the true, authentic personality of the contributor. This comes from an article that Eugene Matusov and I wrote in 2016, and you will have more at the end of the presentation. We also claim that there are 4 dialogic aspects of creativity, and I will describe them very shortly here. So the first aspect of creativity we call addressivity aspect, that every utterance, and in this sense, you can think of utterance, anything that you relate to others with language or gestures, dance, picture, or anything. Addressing the other person is aimed to change something in the dialogic relationships among the participants. The very act of addressing someone has a creative motivation to bring up something new and relevant to the relationship. So every utterance, everything has this aspect of addressing it to somebody, even to yourself. There is another aspect which is not less important, which we call existential aspect. And this, by that we meant it is a recognition and acknowledgement or withdrawal of recognition and acknowledgement by the others and or self of someone's acts as a creative, that is giving or denying an act of a creative existence. It is a direct dialogic recognition of the creativity of someone's dialogic act. It is a recognition and acknowledgement that this bid for creativity can and has transformed the existing relationships, meaning, and knowledge. Even in a very simple way, you can say somebody comes and tells you, did you hear about what's going on today in India? And if you pay attention to that and ask why I didn't hear, or yes, I did, in a way you acknowledge this simple utterance as, or don't acknowledge it as something that makes any difference for you and the person with whom you're talking or conversing. And that can be talk, and that can be painting. You can draw something and somebody else and ask somebody, what do you think about that? There is also axiological aspect of creativity, and that means evaluation of a creative act. Axiology is just a science about values. Evaluating a creative act as pragmatically good or bad, ethical or unethical, constructive or destructive, and so on. So something creative does not have to be good. It may be also something very destructive. As we have recently seen in so many instances of unbelievable authoritarian regimes or authoritarian people around the world, starting even with Hitler, constantly surprising us with their creative but very destructive ways of behaving and doing politics. So a creative act does not necessarily have to be evaluated as good, ethical, constructive, beautiful, and so on. It can be seen in an opposite light, or also, of course, as beautiful, ethical, constructive, and so on. And finally, there is a 4th aspect, and we called it cultural or meta-axiological aspect. It is a cultural value of creativity itself over preservation of tradition, or vice versa. Are particular creative aspects of acts offered and recognized culturally valuable because they are seen as strengthening and promoting a particular culture, or are they culturally insignificant or even running against some vital and culturally defining transitions and customs and norms? This sounds very abstract, and I will try to make it very concrete in the next part. By that, we also critique the conventional standard-based art education. We critique it because it has a preset curriculum, what to teach, often that's preset and has no dialogically meaningful relevance for the students. That is, often it is not acknowledged or recognized by the students. So the district, the teacher, whoever can come up with a curriculum as something, as an offer, but the students does not recognize it as anything relevant to them. So that's one dialogic critique. So on the other hand, the student's artistic offer or bid is often not recognized or acknowledged by the teacher on its own terms as a unique creative act, meaningful within the moment of teaching. as being able to bring something new and change that moment. So the evaluation of the student's act is based on deficit model. How far or how close the student is from the expected preset norm, how big is the gap between the student and the preset endpoint, and not what the student uniquely brings him or herself. The student, therefore, is not a dialogic partner who can be an author of the meaning of art as a consciousness with equal rights to form an opinion. And the student's ideas, opinions, judgments, desires do not gain existence in such conventional standard-based art education. They don't have any relevance and thus cannot be tested against other ideas, opinions, judgments, and desires. And this is when the art teaching falls flat and does not become meaningful to the students who are being taught, maybe not even to the teachers. So what is dialogic authorial art education? Here you see a drawing by a very small child, about 3 years old. This addressivity aspect of it is that the student or a child, or even a teacher, makes a unique dialogic art offer addressed to an assumed relevant for the immediately present others, with a goal to change something in the dialogic relationship among these participants. It can be anything, a line, a squiggle, a sound, a song, rhythm, a story, feeling, or etc. But this is just an offer. Before it is acknowledged, it does not have its existential aspect. So somebody else says, oh, you drew something. What is it? Tell me more. I'm assuming that it is a child and an adult, let's say, or maybe even another child acknowledges existence of this drawing as something interesting, and by that gives it existence. So in order to gain existence, the offer has to be noticed, recognized, and acknowledged as something relevant and meaningful, and indeed changing something for the immediately present participants. It also has to be evaluated. And evaluating an offer in some way among people may create diverse possibilities, enjoying the memory of a joint experience, or liking it as aesthetically pleasing, or as an occasion for conversation, or pretend play, invitation, or being inspired to creatively respond. And in this case, the mother who is an artist of this, the mother of this child who is an artist, this is her response, what she did with this child art. You will be able to see it longer when you get this presentation. Finally, what is the cultural aspect or meta-axiology for this art education, authorial, creative, dialogic art education to happen? Is this beliefs, values, positions, and desires of the educators, policy makers, parents, who create different opportunities and challenges for dialogic art education as creative and critical meaning made. So think about what aspects of dialogism in art education do you think Eisner's view support or suppress? And what aspects of dialogism do you think my pre-service teacher's views supports and suppress? Let me just try to zoom in here. Making good judgments, many ways to see and interpret the world, multiple modes of cognition and communication, new ways of experiencing the world. What do you think? And what do you think about my students' approaches? An instrumental approach, an essentialist approach, a therapeutic approach, a social skill approach, which one of them actually supports dialogism and meaning making in education, and which one of them is less supportive or suppressive? We will discuss that later in the conference, but I leave you with that. What do you think?